Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I am joined in the studio today by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Community Relations Commission of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines, and we will be joined shortly via Skype by Jonathan Tobin, author and commentator from Commentary Magazine. And we're really looking forward to interacting with Jonathan, discussing the various topics all over the world, from domestic issues to Middle East politics. Let's just talk a little bit about what's going on in the world. First of all, Iran had a presidential election. They elected someone who is being called a quote-unquote moderate, who has all kinds of various problems. I know we'll get to this with Jonathan Tobin, but the very simple fact that somebody runs in the Iranian presidential election tends to make them not a moderate, tends to make them somebody who the regime approves of, and in particular, the Guardian Council approved of Hassan Rouhani, which kind of means that the people who are extremists approve of him. It kind of makes it difficult for him to then be called a moderate. So we'll talk a little bit about that with Jonathan Tobin, I'm sure. Regarding Syria, things are totally up in the air in Syria at the moment. There were battles that the Assad forces, or Assad's allies and Assad forces, seem to have been able to push back the rebel groups for a time, mostly through the aid of Hezbollah. And because of Hezbollah's actions in helping the Assad regime, that brought in a whole new aspect of the conflict. And brought in a good bit of the traditional Sunni-Shia conflict into the conflict in Syria, at least brought it more to the fore. So it was less about Assad versus the rest of the people in Syria, and it became more a Sunni versus Shia issue. In addition, you have what came up as an interesting conflict between Hamas and Hezbollah, which today was talked about as less of an issue. But Hamas supports the rebels in Syria, who are Sunni, and obviously Hezbollah is supporting the regime there. So there's conflicts among the pro-Palestinian support groups too. Ongoing protests in Turkey continue to be interesting. The regime is having difficulty putting them down without violence, and has been resorting to stronger and stronger means to try to stop the protests there. Turkey has a history of democracy, and people want to be able to protest. They want to be able to organize in the streets. The government is pushing a secular Islamist agenda and seems to be resorting to fairly repressive crowd control measures, and this isn't sitting well with the population of Turkey. So we could see in the days and weeks ahead continuation of protests and potentially a worsening of the situation in Turkey. As far as the Israeli-Palestinian peace process situation goes, there's an attempt to try to restart the peace process, particularly by Secretary of State John Kerry, who's coming to the region again to try to push a restart in the peace process. But there's a question of where it's going to go. The dialogue on the Israeli side is whether or not the government supports the peace process, how they support the peace process, which parties within the government support the peace process more than others. There was statements made by Danny Danon a couple of weeks ago in which he says this government doesn't support a two-state solution, doesn't support peace. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister himself, came out and said, yes, we do, and I've already proved it. I've already said as much. And then we just had Yaakov Perry, who also is from the Yesh Atid party and is part of is from the Yesh Atid party and is also part of the government at the moment, said that not only does he support peace process, believes there needs to be a two-state solution, and he believes the Arab Peace Initiative needs to be the basis of it. So that's a whole interesting discussion. And we talked briefly about the fact that Salam Fayyad had resigned as prime minister of the Palestinian Authority, and a new person was appointed. Hamdallah by President Abbas. Well, it turns out that Hamdallah realized that probably the same thing that Fayyad did, which was that Abbas really didn't want to share power, really didn't want any help doing what he was doing, and Hamdallah ended up resigning today. Now, whether his resignation will be accepted or something will happen, I don't know. But it certainly seems that within a very short period of time, the Palestinian prime minister regularly resigns, whether it's Fayyad or Hamdallah. There are problems dealing with the Palestinian Authority. And if you think about the fact that the Palestinian Authority doesn't even include Hamas at the moment, it's really difficult to figure out how you're going to have peace negotiations when the Palestinian Authority can't even have the president and prime minister working together for any length of time, much less Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. So there are many other things going on in the world, but we're really looking forward to talking with Jonathan Tobin in just a couple of minutes. I hope you'll stay with us. This has been The World in 5 Minutes, and you're watching Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershad.
I'm administrative manager
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're going to do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's going to be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're going to do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed rider it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you going to say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're going to be listening. They're going to want to know what your challenges are. Then they're going to come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm going to take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed rider, it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines, and we're joined via Skype by Jonathan Tobin, who will be with us in just a minute. I'd like to thank Dr. Ronald Bergman for his continued support of this show, Dr. Ronald Bergman of Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa, and without his support, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Tobin to Understanding the World. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you, Rabbi.
It's wonderful to have you on with us. And there are a number of topics that we can talk about on our show today. And I guess the first one is kind of the most in the news is the election of Hassan Rouhani as the president of Iran. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and who he is?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to understand is that this is not what we mean. When we say a presidential election here in the United States, we know it. Certainly people in Iowa know what that's about. But in Iran, it's something very different. It is a fake election in a fake democracy. The only people that can run in this election are people that are approved by the Grand Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and only those people who agree with him about the nature of the regime and its foreign policy and just about everything are allowed to run. So the system itself is a way for that, it's a very clever in a sense. It's a way for an Islamist tyranny to allow the people of Iran to blow off steam. And 4 years ago, at the last presidential election, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was up for re-election, and the Ayatollah made a big mistake. He made a mistake on two levels. Number one, Ahmadinejad, as much as he became the symbol in the West of all that is wrong with Iran, its anti-Semitism, its hate, its nuclear weapons program, he was really just the front man. He was a spokesman. He didn't, the president gets to be in charge of who takes out the garbage, not who's controlling the nuclear weapons or who's sending aid to terrorists or any of the things that concern us. And Ahmadinejad was a terrible frontman for the Iranians because he was the poster child for why it was necessary to restrain Iran, why Iran had to be stopped, as President Obama has pledged repeatedly since he was first running in Iowa, several years ago. And what happened was that Ahmadinejad and his crowd wanted him to be reelected. And the Grand Ayatollah let them go ahead, steal the election, violently suppress protests against it in the streets. And this helped alienate not only the West, which was given new reason, even for apologists of Iran, to understand what was going on there, but it offended the Iranian people, who at least liked the pretense that they were given some choice in their lives. So this time around, he allowed Rouhani, who was dubbed the most moderate of the various candidates, which is something of a joke because he's no moderate. He was part of the original staff of the original Ayatollah Khomeini, whom we all remember back from the late 70s, and the attack on Americans, and had a long history of support for the regime, and actually did yeoman service for the regime several years ago when he was its nuclear negotiator. And subsequent to that, he bragged about how he had snookered the West and got them talking, which bought years of time for the Iranian nuclear scientists to get closer to their nuclear ambition and to get a weapon. So this is no moderate. And what he does, though, is present a more moderate image, the facade of moderation to the West. And we have seen that a lot of those people, those voices in the United States, who are very uncomfortable with the idea that we are moving towards a confrontation with Iran. They've been in denial about the fact that all efforts towards diplomacy with Iran have met with complete and utter failure because the Iranians are not interested in a deal. They're interested in talking, in running out the clock until they get their weapon. So this has given hope for that. And unfortunately, we have outlets like the New York Times promoting Rouhani as a great moderate and as an opportunity to be exploited. And this is very dangerous because what it does is that it creates a whole new timetable in that we know that there is a limited amount of time until the Iranians get enough nuclear fuel refined, enough uranium enriched to build their bombs at bomb level quality. And if we wait until August, as the New York Times advised us, that we have to wait until August till Rouhani is formally inaugurated in his meaningless position, and then we are to start a whole new round of negotiations, like all the failed P5+1 negotiations. Well, by the time we're done, and by the time we figure out that they're just playing us for fools again, that could be another year for the Iranians. That's an amazing victory for Iran at very little cost. So as much as he is being portrayed as the moderate, the alternative to the Ayatollah Khamenei, in fact, he's the best idea that Khamenei has had in a long time. And I just want to add one more thing that should be of particular interest and a painful point for the Jewish community. In that, my former colleague Alana Goodman recently just reported in the Washington Free Beacon, I wrote about it this morning, that Rouhani is not only not, as we've said, not the moderate that he's been portrayed, but he had a specific role in one of the worst terrorism incidents against Jews in the last generation. And by that, I'm referring to the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires in 1994. 85 people were killed, hundreds wounded. It's a terrible crime that the Argentinians, their investigators, pointed directly to Hezbollah carrying it out at the behest of Iran, their masters. Even worse, we know that the plan for this bombing was hatched in 1993 at a committee meeting of the Security Council in Iran, of which Rouhani is a member. So not only is he not a moderate, he's a terrorist, he's a criminal. And I have to tell you, it's going to be very interesting when, in the coming year, he wishes to follow in the footsteps of Ahmadinejad and come to New York for the next meeting of the General Assembly of the United Nations to give a speech and to, no doubt, parade his moderation. There's going to be a strong effort that to not only deny him entry to the United States as a terrorist. I don't see how he can be allowed to enter this country, having been named in the indictment of the Amia bombing.
Jonathan, this is Mark in Des Moines. What characterizes the thinking at the New York Times? Obviously, it's one of the world's greatest newspapers and one which most of the Jewish community who are interested in current events reads on a regular basis, but yet it is so polemical these days.
Well, I think we could devote a whole program about the New York Times and its motivations. I'll limit myself to and certainly about Israel and the way its media bias against Israel has been demonstrated in the last couple of years anew. I'll limit myself, though, to Iran. On Iran, it is clearly part of the camp. The thinking of the editorial board of the Times is clearly part of the camp that, as I said, is uncomfortable with the looming confrontation, a confrontation that has been made inevitable not by any pressure from Republicans or conservatives or the pro-Israel community, but by the statements of President Obama himself, who said, number one, he said back in the 2008 campaign, he will never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon on his watch. And last year, a little more than a year ago at the AIPAC conference, he went further and said that he would never countenance containment of a nuclear Iran. In other words, we're not going to live with it. We're going to do something. We're going to stop it in advance. He's painted himself into a corner on that. And much of his liberal base and certainly some of his otherwise is normally what would be considered his cheering section at the Times, is appalled at this prospect because they don't want confrontation with Iran. They do want to live with a nuclear Iran, not because I'm not imputing, motives of anti-Semitism towards them or of that they think a nuclear bomb in the hands of the Ayatollah Khamenei is a good thing, but because they don't think it's worth it to try and stop him, and they don't want Israel to try and stop it, and they don't want the United States, which is in a far better position to do something about it, to do something about it as well. So it's there you have it. That's the push for more delay, more prevarication about Iran. They say they want sanctions and diplomacy to work, but we've already seen that the Iranian regime doesn't care about the sanctions as much as it's hurt their economy terribly, hurt the Iranian people terribly. But that doesn't bother Ayatollah Khamenei. I mean, he doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about the people when it comes to any issue. What he cares about is getting his nuclear weapon, pursuing his foreign policy, in terms of branching out, extending his axis of influence over Syria and Lebanon. And that's it. I mean, he is not to be talked out of it. This is an essential part of his program. And quite frankly, all of the so-called moderates in Iran are behind him on that. So that there's really no reason, there's no rational reason to believe that they're going to be negotiated, to be talked out of their nuclear program. And unfortunately, there's no reason, at least in sight, to believe that we can tighten sanctions to the point where that will persuade them. And unfortunately, part of that problem is that the sanctions have not been fully enforced and that they're leaking through. And frankly, we don't have the support of the Russians and the Chinese, much as President Obama has labored mightily to get their support on these issues. They don't have our back on this issue. In fact, Vladimir Putin is very clear, just as he's very clear that he's not going to listen to us on Syria. He as much as he doesn't necessarily want Iran to be dangerous, but the prime motive of Russian foreign policy in the age of this new czar is to thwart the United States, and that's where he is on that.
It sounds to me like this treatment of Rouhani is very similar to this idea that any time is the best time to make peace. We hear of this in the Israeli-Palestinian discussions all the time about the peace process. Now is a great time. Everybody's ready to make peace, and it doesn't matter what's really going on. It doesn't matter what the real background is. I even saw an article in Times of Israel the other day that was saying that all options are no longer on the table because of Rouhani. I mean, none of this makes any sense to me. Why do you think there's this reaction that all of a sudden sane policy goes out the window and it's kumbaya time?
Well, part of it is understandable, Rabbi. Listen, nobody wants war with Iran. Nobody wants to have to use force against Iran. The Israelis certainly don't want to do it. Their armed forces are worried about it, and they're right to be worried about it. The Israeli people are right to be worried about it because an attack on Iran would probably set off conflict with their almost certainly set off a conflict with Hezbollah, and we remember from 2006 what that meant for northern Israel. It was a tragedy. So, of course, Winston Churchill said, jaw is better than war. But the problem is that the reliance on diplomacy here is more or less a concession, not so much in terms of policy. But since we have already proved the Iranians have turned down every possible concession by the West, every possible entreaty, they won't be bribed. As much as the temptation to believe that diplomacy can work, one more time, let's try it again. The Iranians have shown where they are, what they think, and what their priority is, and that's it. But here in the West, in the United States, we're a war-weary country. Let's be honest. After Iraq and after Afghanistan, Americans are not looking for a third conflict. Even if it wouldn't, as it wouldn't in the case of Iran, it wouldn't mean boots on the ground. It would be airstrikes. But we're not looking for that. And a lot of Americans, I wouldn't say necessarily the majority, are eager for anything to avoid conflict, even if it means that President Obama will not make good on his pledge. Now, the problem with this sort of a discussion is that it mostly centers on the dangers of conflict. And conflict, as I said, would be very dangerous. It would be dangerous for the United States. It would be dangerous for Israel. But what we also have to take into consideration of what are the dangers of a nuclear Iran, and they are enormous in terms of not just the existential threat to Israel, although that is not inconsiderable. This is a regime that has repeatedly stated its desire to wipe Israel off the map, and a nuclear weapon and long-range missiles gives them the ability to at least threaten to do that. So that's very serious. But more than that, an Iranian nuclear bomb scares the rest of the region, the Arab states, almost as much as it does Israel. And it scares the West because it just completely changes the strategic balance of the region in favor of a terrorist funding regime that is expansionist and that considers itself to be in a permanent state of conflict with the West. This is about the most dangerous scenario you could possibly envision. I mean, yesterday, Vladimir Putin, or earlier in the week, Vladimir Putin turned down President Obama's initiative about reducing the number of nuclear weapons that the United States and Russia has, and he was saying, well, oh, that's fine, but what about Iran? I mean, for once, Putin was making sense. That there are more, that it isn't the problem now, isn't the United States and Russia, it's the danger of a nuclear Iran. And I think people would rather live with that theoretical possibility than face up to the need to do something about it. But that's a very short-sighted, very dangerous policy, and it's one that I think we can't advocate too hard against.
Jonathan, does Saudi Arabia have a real role to play with Iran?
To the Saudis? Well, the Saudis are, as I mentioned a moment ago, about the Arabs being as afraid of Iran as Israel, and I think the Saudis certainly fit into that category. The Saudis would be very happy to see somebody take care of their rivals across the Gulf. I think they would not be unsupportive, at least quietly, of any strike on Iran. But we have to understand they're not going to stick their necks out on this. They're not going to make any public diplomatic initiatives. They don't care. I mean, they care, but they don't care that much. And they certainly won't endanger themselves. They're afraid of the Iranians. And they won't, put up a public stink as, they won't make it hard for the United States and Israel to do it, but they'll fight to the last American and Israeli to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons. I don't think we should, as much as they will be quietly cheering on every effort to stop Iran, we should not depend on them at all. They are not reliable in that respect. Nor should we expect the rest of the Arab world to do that. Right now they're worrying about Syria and the idea that Iran has its hooks into that country with its volunteers and its Hezbollah auxiliaries fighting there and seemingly winning the war right now against the Syrian rebels, who are not necessarily good guys either, as we know. But, they're seeing the whole strategic equation of the Middle East going up, in flames and being marginalized themselves. But, again, we can't rely on them to do what only the United States can do and what Israel can do.
So let's go to Syria just for a moment here. We're talking about Iranian influence in Syria, and where Syria is becoming I would say not only it's not even just a distraction, it's pretty much all-encompassing of all of the dialogue about the Middle East at the moment. And the Iranian nuclear situation is just kind of fallen out of the discussion because of what's going on in Syria. So, what do you see as possible solutions in Syria? What do you see as a way forward? It seems like it's almost impossible to deal with, and all the solutions are awful. And all I can see, and we've talked about this on the show, is kind of ongoing conflict for the foreseeable future.
Well, you're right, Rabbi. There are no good options. There have never been any really good options in Syria. But I guess right now, as this conflict has escalated, more than 90,000 people have been slaughtered there. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. Intervention by the West against Assad might have worked and worked fairly, at least much easier had we done so 2 years ago. But that boat has sailed. I think the way to think about it now, if I can pull a historical analogy out of my pocket, is it's become a little bit like the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, if I can tax our audience's historical knowledge to that extent. In the 1930s, the Spanish Civil War, which was a conflict between sort of the Catholic reactionaries and socialist and communist revolutionaries who had formed a government and were being overthrown by Franco. And, we know that much, but in the 30s, it became the great proxy war between the West and the Axis, between Hitler and Mussolini and the Nazis and the fascists, who poured in troops and decided that they were going to win, that they were going to aid Franco and make Spain their first foreign policy victory. And the great question was, why did the West let it happen? It became sort of the crucible, the prelude to the horror that would follow during World War II. Well, I don't want to make it an exact analogy, but right now, what's going on in Syria seems to be more about who's fighting there. Not so much the issues of who should govern Syria, a selection of very bad choices, but who's helping the people who want to govern Syria. Frankly, Assad on his own would have fallen a long time ago. I mean, he might have fallen as soon as President Obama foolishly stated that he must go and that he will go. But with the help of Iran, and with the troops that Hezbollah, who act on Iran's orders, have provided him, as well as the military aid that has been delivered to Syria and is going on being delivered to Syria from the Russians, he's not only held his own, he's winning. So on the other side, we have the rebels, who are a mixed lot, some more presentable by Western standards, some are directly tied to al-Qaeda, who have been aided by various Arab and Islamic groups in the region. The Saudis certainly have a stake in that, a small stake. More to the point, the Islamist government of Turkey has been a great aider of the Syrian rebels and allowed them to use their border as a base. So, right now, I think we have to understand it's not just, do we want Bashar Assad, a butcher, to go on ruling Syria, or do we want his opponents, who are, some of whom are connected with al-Qaeda, they're Islamists, they're, from our point of view, just as bad. It's the question of, do we want Iran to be to be running Syria? Do we want or do we want people connected to Al Qaeda? You can say that we don't have a dog in that fight, but in fact we do, because an Iran that is preeminent in the region is much more dangerous to the United States. It's much more dangerous to Israel, and so we're left with this Hobson's hopeless choice of bad options. And the problem is that the United States has been very slow to take any action. I mean, it might have been arguable for us to stay out altogether, never to say that we wanted Assad to go, never to say, as President Obama did, that if the Syrian regime used chemical weapons, that would be a red line that we wouldn't allow them to cross. But the president did make those statements. He did draw a line in the sand on behalf of the United States. And to no small extent, our credibility is on the line. If Assad survives with Iran's help and their influence, the United States is weaker, is much less able to defend itself, and unfortunately so is Israel as a result of that.
The United Nations, a disaster?
Well, the United Nations, I mean, that question and the obvious answer, yes, the United Nations is a disaster. We could say that about just about every question, about every moment in the history of the last 30 years. It's especially so here just because of the structure of the Security Council and the way things work. I mean, the fact is, the Russians and the Chinese have vetoes there, and the Russians, let's understand this. I said this, in passing a little while ago. Russian foreign policy, that of Vladimir Putin, is based on the idea of reassembling the Tsarist Empire or the Soviet Empire, however he sees himself, or whether he sees himself as another Tsar or another Brezhnev. And, Russia's still a poor country. It's not a superpower anymore. But it does have one client state in the Middle East, where it used to have many. And that one client state is Syria. They have a naval base there. They don't want to lose it. They will do whatever they can to hold on to it. And they have the power to complicate our lives and to bolster Assad to no end. We had the unfortunate spectacle of Secretary of State Kerry journeying to Moscow in the last month, more or less begging Putin to back off, play along with the rest with the West, and not to let Assad and Syria win. And Putin said sorry. He kept the secretary waiting for a couple of hours, and then he told him to take a hike. So we're in a very difficult position there. And as long as the Russians see their credibility, see their foreign policy at stake in Syria, the United Nations is incapable of any action. It will not. It will be of no help. That's the basic fact of life. As much as President Obama came into office decrying the supposed unilateralism of George W. Bush, and promising to work and to restore our reputation and to create a multilateral foreign policy, the fact is we are as much on our own as we were 5 years ago. And President Obama saw a little bit of that this week in Europe, where he's not getting, he's no longer treated as a rock star. The fact is, if we want to do something about Syria, the United States and its Western allies are the ones who have to do it. It's a difficult choice. Americans certainly don't want to put our own troops at risk there. But we have to ask ourselves: is it better for Assad and Iran to win, or is it better to take our chances with the other side? I'm not going to pretend that that's an easy or a good choice, but that's the choice we're left with. And as long as we keep pretending that we don't have to make that choice, or that some outside power, the United Nations or somebody else is going to save the situation for ourselves, I'm afraid we're not going to get any closer to a realistic policy.
Jonathan, we're going to take a short break. When we get back from our break here, we want to move a little bit to the west and talk about what's going on in Turkey. And then I think move a little bit south and talk about the attempt to restart the peace process. So when we get back from our break in just a minute, we'll talk about those things. You're watching Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drink, dance, party. Kitty's is the ultimate dance club in Des Moines. A huge dance floor with room to move, 3 bars to keep your drinks full, and kickin' DJs playing all your favorite dance music. At Kitty's, we've always got your birthday party planned with Birthday Fridays. That's right, when your birthday rolls around, there's only one place to go. Gather up your friends and head to Kitty's, where you drink free on the Friday of your birthday week. Find out more about Birthday Fridays at kittysusa.com. Kitty's, all kinds of people, all kinds of music, all kinds of fun.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines, and we're joined via Skype by Jonathan Tobin from Commentary Magazine. And Jonathan, let's talk Turkey. What's been going on in Turkey, and what are the implications for the United States and for Israel?
Well, the situation in Turkey does have a lot of implications for us in the United States, especially for Israel as well. The government of Prime Minister Erdogan, which is an Islamist government, it's been in power for over a decade, and it has been gradually transforming a secular country. The modern Republic of Turkey was created to be a secular alternative to Islamism. And it has been gradually chipping away at freedoms, becoming more authoritarian. And the people of Turkey, many of whom were willing to make their peace with Erdogan because they saw him as an alternative to the military, which was repressive, and and as someone who is interested in economic growth, they're now seeing the price, of this devil's bargain that they made by putting an Islamist in power in their country. And they've taken to the streets, much the same in the way that happened in other countries with the Arab Spring in Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere. And that puts us in the West, and specifically the United States, in an interesting position. What the people of Turkey want is for the Erdogan government to pull back and to stop trying to Islamicize their country and to allow democracy to flourish rather than moving closer and closer to a theocracy. However, the situation is complicated by a couple of facts. Number one, Turkey is a NATO ally. Turkey is not just some Middle Eastern country. It's a country that's been integrated into the West and for a long time. More to the point, Erdogan has been perhaps President Obama's favorite foreign leader. They have the best relationship that he has with virtually any other foreign leader. And we know that President Obama does, even though he had a very good visit to Israel this past spring, he's had very bad personal relations with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He doesn't have good relations with a lot of foreign leaders. But he does and he's bragged about it, he has good relations with Erdogan. They seem to understand each other. And President Obama seems to be the only foreign leader that Erdogan listens to. So that ought to put the United States in a good position to use some of our leverage, to use our bully pulpit, to influence Erdogan to ease up and not to be sending his military and his police into the streets to repress demonstrations. But we have been mighty quiet. Washington has taken a very hands-off stance towards what's been going on in Turkey, which is a big contrast to what happened elsewhere in the Middle East when the United States was more vocal. So that's one. That's an element of hypocrisy. It creates bad will for the United States in what ought to be a very friendly country for us. But we have to understand that Erdogan is important to the Middle East in a lot of different ways. It's like an interlocking puzzle. On the one hand, the president sees Erdogan as essential to the hope of any action to prevent Assad, who we were just talking about, from prevailing in Syria, and sees him as a bulwark against Iran in that way. Although the Turks are very much in contention with Iran over who rules Syria, the Turks have not been very helpful in terms of keep enforcing sanctions against Iran. Complicated situation. Just as troubling, if not more so, is the way that Turkey has turned against Israel. Turkey and Israel used to be open and friendly allies. Under Erdogan, that was gradually ratcheted back to the point of coldness and then an open break. He used the incident of the flotilla that went with government approval, Turkish government approval, to try and break the Israeli blockade of the Hamas government in Gaza. People were killed. It was unfortunate. It was not Israel's best moment. But Erdogan used that as a pretext to break off relations and to step up his support of Hamas. Now, you mentioned a little while ago about this interesting dynamic of how the two terrorist forces that arraigned against Israel, Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south, have lined up on different sides in the conflict in Syria. That's especially interesting because Hamas used to be very closely allied with Iran, got much of their armaments to torment southern Israel and to launch terrorism from Iran. But they've broken with them. And then, the question is, well, why would they do that? Why would they offend their patron? And the fact is, they've got a new patron, and it's Turkey. It's Erdogan. Erdogan has a great deal of influence in Turkey, and along with his alliance, his close relations with the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, he's now very close. He's become the prime foreign sponsor of Hamas. And so they have gone along with their Turkish friend in opposing Assad in Iran, in Syria. That helps complicate things in Syria, but it also shows the ability of Turkey to make mischief for Israel. I mean, we haven't gone into the moribund peace process with the Palestinians. But so long as Hamas is empowering Gaza and so long as it can count on foreign support, principally from a major nation like Turkey, it has no reason to back off on its ideology or to do anything but obstruct peace. So Erdogan's future is actually connected not just to the future of Bashar Assad in Syria, it's connected to even the minimal hope, and it's a minimal hope, of there ever being peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And I would say as long as he is in power in Turkey, that's never going to happen.
Now, I've also talked about the fact in previous shows that Egypt is seeing conflict in the Sinai with Iranian-backed militia. And I guess this goes along with what you're talking about here, that Turkey and Hamas and Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood side basically, is trying to do one thing in Gaza, and Iran is trying to get Islamic Jihad to operate in Gaza, necessarily opposed to what Hamas wants. Is that how you see what's going on in Gaza too, or what do you think is going on?
Well, that's part of it, certainly. I mean, again, we're going back to the same theme of proxy wars. Just as in Syria, we have a proxy war between the allies of Iran and the allies of Turkey, or possibly the West. We have going on in the Sinai and Gaza. The Iranians are not happy that Hamas hasn't gone along with them on Syria, that they've chosen to side with Turkey against them, and so they're looking to puff up and to bolster Islamic Jihad. Now, Islamic Jihad, another terrorist organization, is not in a good position to compete with Hamas. Hamas has, operates, with tremendous power in Gaza. They control the area, but the Islamic Jihad can make mischief for them, just as Hamas once made mischief for Fatah, which once ruled Gaza as well. So we shouldn't underestimate their ability to keep the pot stirring, and they have an open interest in fomenting conflict and violence against Israel. Again, I mean, it all comes back to that. So we shouldn't be surprised to see, as that conflict develops, as Hamas and Hezbollah are on different sides, and Iran looks to make Hamas pay for its decision, that there isn't going to be an attempt to ratchet up the violence against Israel, hoping that Israel will strike back. Israel understands this, but at the same time, it is counting on Hamas, if Hamas wants the ceasefire to last, to control the elements under its operating in its territory, which I might remind our audience is, for all intents and purposes, an independent Palestinian state.
Now, speaking of that, what is going on with this attempt to restart the peace process? And it just seems like the perspectives are coming from all directions, among the Israeli leaders, among the Palestinian leaders. I don't understand how Secretary Kerry feels like this process can move forward at this point. Usually the kind of negotiations that we're talking about would require a lot of behind-the-scenes work, interacting with all these leaders, and then when you finally come to the region to start and to try to start peace process, everybody's already on board. But that doesn't seem to be where we are at the moment.
No, we are not. And I think up until this last week or two, I think the only person who believed that Kerry's initiative had a prayer of success was Secretary Kerry. Right now, I'm not so sure even he believes that. He's put off another visit to the region for more of his shuttle diplomacy to concentrate on other issues. And it's possible that by the time he comes back to it, he will have, shall we say, sobered up about it. The fact is, as much as peace is desirable, as much as certainly the people of Israel long for peace, as much as the United States would like there to be peace, the situation there argues against it in that there is virtually no chance. You hesitate to say 100%. It's close to 100% as you can get. Ivory soap, the old 99 and 44, 100%. Maybe we should stick with that. There's that little of a chance that the peace process can be revived, or even if it can be revived, that it can succeed. The reason for that is not because various elements of the Israeli government have said things that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't like. It's because the Palestinians don't wish for it to succeed. The Palestinian Authority has boycotted peace talks for the last 4.5 years. They fled the peace talks that they were holding with Ehud Olmert at the end of 2008, and I use the word fled advisedly because Olmert offered a peace offer. This was the third big peace offer the Palestinians had gotten from Israel of an independent state, almost all of the West Bank, Gaza, a share of Jerusalem, even giving up Israeli sovereignty over the old city of Jerusalem. And he did, unlike Yasser Arafat, who turned down offers similar to those in 2000 and 2001, Abbas fled the room. He didn't want to say no, he couldn't say yes, and he didn't want to publicly say no, so he just fled. The Palestinians haven't been back to the peace table since then. The Palestinian Authority and Fatah is in no position to make that sort of a decision, which runs against the will, I think, clearly of their political culture. They aren't willing to recognize the legitimacy of a Jewish state, no matter where its borders are concerned. They say sometimes words to those effect to the West, but the correlation of forces within the Palestinian world argues against it. They can't do it. And even if Abbas wanted to do it, which is highly doubtful, Hamas won't let him do it. He's not going to make a peace. He's not going to sign a peace treaty that Hamas is not part of, and Hamas will never agree to a peace treaty along those lines to end the conflict. So the whole thing is it's a dead-end argument. It's not going anywhere, and everybody knows it. The Palestinians know it. The Israelis know it. Most sensible people in the United States know it. However, Secretary Kerry, who has a very high opinion of his diplomatic skills, although that high opinion may have been chastened to some extent by his experiences with Russia in the last couple of months and with the way the Palestinians have continued to stiff him. You know, the first Obama administration was largely characterized by conflicts between Washington and Jerusalem as President Obama tried to pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu to make concessions. He sort of tried to tilt the diplomatic playing field in the direction of the Palestinians. And what happened is that President Obama got into all those fights for nothing because the Palestinians never took advantage of any of it. They really showed up the president. And one thinks, you know, as much as he certainly is still in favor of the peace process and says so, even when he was in Israel making those very Zionist speeches, I sense that President Obama is not, unlike his first term, is not going to be expending any of his precious political capital on a peace process push that the Palestinians won't take advantage of anyway. So it's, you know, I think he's let Secretary of State Kerry go off on his own hook and is going to let him, he's going to give him enough rope to hang himself with it. I don't think anything's going to happen there. As far as Israel, we have an interesting dynamic, and that there is a real debate within the Israeli government. I don't think it's so much a debate as to, are they going to support a two-state solution if a two-state solution were ever possible? Because quite frankly, if the Palestinians were willing to go to the table, were willing to accept one of the past offers that they had rejected, were willing to say, yes, we are willing to end the conflict, live with Israel, abandon the right of return, end this for all time, Prime Minister Netanyahu knows, and the right-wing elements of his coalition know, that the majority of the Israeli people and the majority of the coalition itself would embrace that. They'd have no choice but to do it because the Israeli people want peace and are willing to make, and have shown in the past 20 years that they're willing to make egregious sacrifices to achieve it or to take the chance of getting it. But right now, everybody in Israel knows that's not on the table. It's not going to happen. It's a false choice because even if Netanyahu's government stated that it wants peace, and it has stated that, even if nobody said, if there were no dissenters within its ranks, the peace process still isn't going to restart because the Palestinians don't want it to restart. So the debate isn't about so much the two-state solution, which isn't happening anytime soon, or perhaps even in the foreseeable future. The debate is, should we go on pretending as if there can be a two-state solution for the sake of our international standing and for keeping good relations with the United States? The majority of the people in the Israeli government, and certainly Netanyahu, understands that it is in their interest to go on pretending that a two-state solution is possible. And, some of members of his government from the right, Naftali Bennett, the head of the Bayit HaYehudi party, even members of his own Likud, and his Likud caucus it's a very nationalist caucus. They're not, for the most part, not very keen on the peace process. They're saying, no, we're against the two-state solution. But you know what? That doesn't even matter. There isn't a two-state solution on the table. So it's a purely theoretical debate. It's one that doesn't necessarily make Israel's government look very pro-peace, but it doesn't change the facts that there is no peace to argue about. Because if there were, there's no question that this government would embrace it. There's no question that the next government would embrace it if it was headed by somebody else. And I should add, in case anybody doesn't understand, the majority of the members of this government, of Netanyahu's coalition, have said that they're for the two-state solution. That's a matter of record. But, obviously there's going to be dissent, but it's a theoretical argument. It's not about anything real. And I'd say that, that's unfortunate that peace is a theoretical concept in Israel now, but that's why the election that was fought there in January was the first one that wasn't about foreign policy or defense or about the peace process. There's no 50-50 left-right divide in Israel anymore because the left that believed in the peace process, that believed in the Palestinian will to make peace, has been decimated. They're completely marginalized and out of power. Again, as much as we in the United States, certainly within the Jewish community, sometimes act as if, it was a real chance, as if we're talking about something that can happen next week, next month. The majority of the people, the overwhelming majority of the people in Israel know that that's not on the table.
Well, we have just a couple minutes left, Jonathan, and I saw your article today about immigration reform, and I know some of my listeners are interested in immigration reform. Can you tell us just in a quick 2-minute summary about the immigration bill and what you were saying in your article today?
Well, as we say on one foot, it's tough because it's a complicated issue, and it's been a long, very bitter debate, certainly within the Republican Party and among conservatives. But there's always been a division between conservatives who embrace the idea of immigration reform because it's good for the economy, because attempting to keep the status quo makes no sense, and those who are just offended by the idea that illegal immigrants would be given a path to citizenship, that they wouldn't be punished or deported to some extent. And they've also had a very good point that, in 1986 we did an immigration reform bill that said that they would strengthen the border, and that didn't happen. Well, what's happened actually today is that there's been a compromise put into the Gang of Eights, the bipartisan immigration reform bill, that will strengthen the border to an extent that is unprecedented. They're going to double the number of border patrol there. They're going to put in drones. They're going to extend the fence basically another 700 miles between Mexico and the United States. And, nothing, as Israel can tell you, there's no way to hermetically seal any border, let alone a border in the middle of a desert. That's about as far as we can go. And at that point, we have to ask, so what are opponents of this really worried about? What are they interested in? And, sometimes I get the feeling, and I understand people who say we have to respect the rule of law, but the rule of law is being flouted by the status quo. And the choice now is between the status quo and this reform bill. And, I listen to some people, and it's like what they want, is to have this, for anybody who's watched the Game of Thrones fantasy show on HBO, they have a 700-foot ice wall that extends hundreds of miles to protect the mythical continent of Westeros against zombies. Well, I think that's what they want along the Rio Grande, but that's not going to happen, and it wouldn't help that much even if it did. So we have to ask, why are they angry about this? And unfortunately, I fear this, and I say this as someone who's a conservative, that there are people in this country who still speak to the old spirit, anti-immigrant spirit. It's been a constant theme throughout our history. They either don't like the idea that there are going to be more Hispanics, they don't like the idea of immigration at all, and that just goes completely contrary to what is good for America, what's good for the economy, and I think it's senseless. And I think this current bill makes about as much sense on this issue as anything that we have to choose. So that's where I stand on it. I know a lot of people disagree, and this bill may yet fail because of opposition in the House of Representatives, but I don't think there's a really rational alternative to it.
Thank you, Jonathan Tobin. It was wonderful having you on the show today. And our show will be podcast on understandingtheworld.libsyn.com. And it will also be on YouTube, as you can see the video, youtube.com/one-to-talk-to-net. Thank you for joining us on Understanding the World today, and we'll see you next week, same time, June 27th, 2 o'clock, right here on one-to-talk-to.com.